This episode contains graphic content that may not be suitable for all ages. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat with someone at 988lifeline.org. Those outside of the US, reach out to someone at your local crisis center or hotline. Please do not suffer in silence. On the evening of November 4th, 2015, police were called to a crime scene in Sharpstown, a neighborhood located in southwest Houston. The caller, who identified himself as the victim's boyfriend, had reportedly discovered the victim lying on her bed in a pool of blood. When police got there, they discovered a brutal crime scene. A young woman had been savagely murdered, her throat cut from left to right with a sharp, non-serrated blade. She'd only been dead for about an hour, if that. Yet the circumstances of the crime itself were strange. Despite being found nude, there were no apparent signs of sexual assault, yet the victim had had sex shortly before her death. Other than the woman being found murdered, there were no other signs that a crime had taken place. No signs of a break-in, no forced entry. Nothing inside seemed wrong other than the vicinity around the bed, where the victim's body had been found. Years later, it would be suspected that an experienced serial killer was involved in the crime. Yet, to date, no arrests have been made, and questions continue to plague the case of this murdered young woman from 2015. This is the story of Shelbey Thornburgh-Crocker. Shelbey Jean Thornburgh-Crocker was born on August 18, 1995 in Decatur, Texas, about an hour northwest of Dallas. She was the second child born to Robert Thornburgh Jr. and Leslie Thornburgh-Crocker, the first being Shelbey's older sister, Christina. Shelbey and Christina would remain incredibly close throughout their childhoods, with Christina even taking over as Shelbey's guardian during her late teen years. You see, the two had endured a rather difficult life together, having spent long periods in and out of various foster homes. As a result, both had suffered abuse and neglect, but almost always had each other. Through thick and thin, they had that. Because of the abuse and neglect she faced throughout her childhood, Shelbey developed depression pretty early on in her life. Due to that, she ended up developing some unhealthy eating habits to help cope, resulting in her being overweight. As Shelbey entered adulthood, she relocated from rural Texas to the city of Houston. There, she lived in the high-rise Conquistador apartment building located along the 7500 block of Bel Air Boulevard. This was in the neighborhood known as Sharpstown, which, depending on who you ask, can either be described as a nicer neighborhood or a rougher one. Regardless, Shelbey lived in apartment 3B at the Conquistador apartment complex, along with her boyfriend, Marcus Dwayne Johnson. But more on him later. At some point in her later teen years, Shelbey had given birth to a son. While some information about her son has been published online, I would like to refrain from disclosing that, due to it having little relevance to the rest of the story. Regardless, she had a son, and had plenty of pictures of the two of them on her social media profiles. I don't know what the extent of their relationship was, nor Shelbey's relationship with the father. But again, for the sake of today's story, that's of little importance. In Houston, Shelbey dreamed of pursuing a career as a model, which would have surprised almost anyone that knew her growing up. As she entered adulthood though, Shelbey began putting herself through the gauntlet of weight loss, and managed to lose an incredible amount of weight in a surprisingly short window. Within 18 months, Shelbey had managed to lose 180 pounds, and looked almost like a different person than she had throughout her teen years. As Shelbey entered her 20s, she planned to continue on with her self-improvements to better her own appearance and mindset. She planned to have a breast augmentation in the future, and had already begun scheduling appointments for a tummy tuck, which she hoped would help aid her in her quest to become a model. She actually made a $1,000 payment to a surgeon for the tummy tuck on November 4th, 2015. a date that would become notable for other terrible reasons. On the evening of Wednesday, November 4th, 2015, a 911 call was placed by Shelby's boyfriend, Marcus Dwayne Johnson, at around 10:10 p.m. During the call, which was forwarded to Houston police, Marcus told dispatchers, "Someone is dead. Someone has killed my girl." Uniformed officers began arriving at the Conquistador apartment a short time later, and there, in apartment 3B, they discovered the body of 20-year-old Shelbey Thornburgh-Crocker laying nude in her bed. Blood was all over her in the crime scene, spilling down onto the mattress and the floor, as well as on the nearby walls and even onto a nearby L-shaped couch. An examination would later reveal that Shelby's throat had been cut by someone using a very large knife, perhaps a chef's knife or a Bowie knife. Something with a sharp, non-serrated blade. Based on the wound, her throat had been cut from the left to the right, indicating that the offender was right-handed. Shockingly, it appeared like Shelby had been in the midst of having sex when she was killed, with the person who killed her having cut her throat while positioned behind her. Houston Police Detective Dustin Crowder would later recall to Crime Watch Daily, "The first impression I got when my partner and I arrived, Shelby was nude, so obviously this person had some sort of relationship with her. There's no evidence right now that indicates that she was sexually assaulted. It appears to have been consensual." From here, investigators would begin their search to find out what happened and who had killed the 20-year-old in her own apartment. However, their search was stymied by the fact that several uniformed police officers had been in the apartment that night, before homicide detectives even showed up at the scene. Obviously, any loss is tragic. That's something that I've tried to get across on this podcast over the past, how many years has it been? 9? Well, 9 years then. But throughout this podcast, the one thing that I've tried to impress over and over again is that every single life lost in such a cruel manner as this, no matter how old or young, is a tragic loss for humanity. At the very least, it's a tragic loss for those around them. After all, we're all connected in some way, through friends, family, neighbors, coworkers, even people that we chat with online or engage in niche hobbies with from time to time. When somebody is suddenly plucked out of life like this, the void where they had been is noticed, especially when the manner of their death is so shocking and without warning. Addressing it almost becomes taboo in a way, and it just perpetuates the grieving of those close to the victim. Now, with all that being said, these stories are always made especially painful when the life lost is someone so young, someone with decades of life left ahead of them. At the time of her murder, Shelby was just 20 years old. She'd barely even begun living her life, having been dealt a tough hand at the onset of it. In the months before her death, she'd worked so hard, losing nearly 200 pounds in less than 2 years in an effort to better herself. And she had dreams of setting herself and her loved ones up for a better life in the days ahead. But in an instant, Shelby's life, her dreams, her ambitions, her pain, her story, was snuffed out by someone who cared so little for her life that they ended it. They took advantage of her in her most vulnerable state, a move that to me is the embodiment of cowardice. Afterward, Shelby was remembered by those that knew and loved her. Most prominent among them was her sister and lifelong advocate, Christina Scott. Together, they had endured so much, but now Christina was left to wade through life without her only sibling. She would later tell reporters with Houston's KTRK, "She has a lot of family and friends who truly miss her. She was my best friend. I'm begging y'all, she was only 20, didn't deserve her life to be gone, and cut at the throat." In the same interview, Christina would pose a statement to Shelby's killer. "All I got to say is you're pretty sorry for taking a life from me. How could you live with yourself? I hope when they catch you, you regret every action you'd done that night." As you can imagine, investigators with the Houston Police Department started their investigation close to home. In most cases like Shelbey's, where a young woman is killed at home, the most likely suspect is the person that she cohabitated with. So obviously, early suspicion fell upon Shelbey's boyfriend, Marcus Dwayne Johnson, also known as Mark D., who had called 911 to report finding Shelbey's body on the evening of November 4th, 2015. However, as police would learn, Marcus was only Shelbey's boyfriend, quote-unquote, in a public-facing kind of way. Their relationship was a bit more complicated than that. You see, as investigators would learn early on, Shelbey had been a sex worker for some time before her death. Marcus, who put on the image of being her boyfriend, again I'm using quotes for that, was essentially her pimp. While this nomenclature isn't something official, after all, it's not like sex workers in this country enter into legally binding contracts. But for all intents and purposes, this was their relationship. So to the rest of the world, the two appeared to be boyfriend and girlfriend, but the reality of their relationship was much different. As I touched on a bit earlier, Shelbey dreamed of pursuing modeling, which she knew wasn't going to be an easy path, so she took up sex work as a means to an end. As stated by her sister, Christina, to Crime Watch Daily, she was using the escorting business as a way to get her stuff done that she wanted to become a model. Through this line of work, Shelbey managed to lift herself out of poverty and seemed poised to succeed. She had managed to lose a lot of weight in approximately 18 months and was using the money that she made to further her goals. Yet, this life wasn't without its hiccups. More than a year before her murder, in April of 2014, Shelbey was arrested and charged with prostitution. She'd ultimately plead no contest and spent a little more than a month in a county jail before being let out and forced to pay a small fine. She was arrested again more than a year after that, in June of 2015, but charges for that case were dropped in October, roughly 1 month before her murder. After police were called to Shelbey's apartment on the evening of November 4th, they suspected her boyfriend Marcus of having been involved in some way, especially after they learned of the sex work. But despite Marcus having a lengthy criminal record, he'd only ever been convicted of drug-related crimes, nothing violent. Based on that and what police observed during their early investigation, it did not really seem like Marcus had anything to do with the murder itself. Marcus was questioned 3 times by police but maintained his innocence throughout. Detective Dustin Crowder would later tell Crime Watch Daily, "We investigated the boyfriend extensively, and most certainly we haven't ruled him out as a suspect." Through this potential link to sex work, however, investigators began to theorize that one of Shelbey's clients may have been the culprit behind the brutal crime. They would discover that on the evening of her murder, November 4th, 2015, Shelbey had posted an advertisement for her services on the website Backpage. The ad, which had been posted at 6:32 p.m., roughly 2 hours before her murder, listed her name as Hannah, and through it, she made herself available for either in or out calls. Now, we're going to pause for just a moment to hear a word from today's sponsors. An autopsy would reveal little more than what officials had learned early on. 20-year-old Shelbey Thornburgh-Crocker had been killed in the middle of having sex, with the killer behind her at the time, using this position of vulnerability to get access to her neck. Whoever he had been, he used a large knife to cut Shelbey's neck from left to right, evidently doing so with some force. According to the autopsy report, the cut to Shelbey's neck was 5.5 inches in length, with no ragged edges near the serrations, indicating that a non-serrated knife was used. The killer had cut through Shelbey's jugular and carotid artery within a moment, cutting through various neck muscles down into the bone. Reportedly, the wound nearly cut into her spinal column. She had also suffered some cuts on her wrist, which were likely obtained whilst trying to defend herself in some way. After her throat was cut, Shelbey's body had fallen forward, resulting in her bleeding out onto the mattress and the nearby floor. Because of the amount of blood found at the scene, she had likely died rather quickly. Her body had been discovered on the mattress about an hour after she had been killed, likely laying in the same position that she had fallen. While the autopsy did not reveal much new information, the police investigation itself had begun to paint a pretty vivid picture. In particular, Shelbey's text and phone records, which revealed that she had made a date with a prospective client the night of her murder, which was to take place at her apartment in Houston. At 8:06 p.m., this client texted Shelbey, telling her,
"I'll be there in 20 minutes.
25 minutes later, at 8:33 p.m., she'd received a follow-up text.
Hey, I'm here."
A check of the Conquistador apartment complex's surveillance footage showed a man entering the apartment lobby a little over 1 minute after this, at 8:35 p.m. Looking down at his phone, this man enters the lobby and then sits down at the end of the hallway, near the elevators. At 8:40 p.m., Shelbey texted Marcus the word good, spelled G-U-D, which was reportedly their code for things proceeding as planned. By this point, it seems like the client was upstairs in Shelbey's apartment. However, at 8:57, just 17 minutes after this final text was sent, the client could be seen leaving the apartment through the lobby, wearing the same clothes and seeming undeterred. Nothing at all seemed to be amiss. Over the next hour or so, Marcus did not hear back from Shelbey, who wasn't responding to any of his texts or calls. He would then go over to her apartment at around 10 p.m., which is when he found her bloody remains. His phone call to 911 was made at around 10:10. I'm sure some of you are probably thinking, wait, did you just say that surveillance footage captured Shelbey's last client on the night that she was murdered? Yes, I did say that, and while the footage isn't crystal clear, it's pretty damn revealing, making this case incredibly frustrating. This man was Shelbey's final client, who had been in her apartment at around the time that she was suspected to have been killed. This suspected killer was recorded walking through the apartment lobby at around 8:35 p.m., then walking out just over 20 minutes later at 8:57 p.m. While walking out, he seems to have had his left hand in his pocket, possibly indicating that he had something to hide on it, maybe cuts of some kind, or a wound. Based on the footage, it's pretty evident that the suspected killer was a white man, with short-cut dark hair, possibly a receding hairline, and pretty average facial features. At the time, he was wearing a light-colored long-sleeve shirt, shorts, tennis shoes, and sunglasses. The latter might not have just been an ill-fated fashion choice at nearly 9 p.m., but he possibly wore sunglasses to conceal his facial features. As stated by Houston police officer Dustin Crowder, "We believe it was to conceal his identity." Investigators looked at the cell phone number that the suspected killer had texted Shelbey from and determined it to belong to a non-traceable track phone, a burner phone purchased with cash. The type of phone that you see off in the corner of gas stations or convenience stores, embodied best by fictional characters like Saul Goodman or really anyone from The Wire. For that reason, the phone was not registered to the unknown subject's name, and made it almost impossible to determine his identity through it. Whoever had committed this crime, he seems to have had the goal of getting in and out of Shelbey's apartment quickly, making his motive incredibly hard to grasp. As stated by Detective Dustin Crowder to Crime Watch Daily, "It seems as if the suspect committed the crime and then made sure to be gone as quickly as possible." Over the years, some have theorized that Shelbey might have been specifically targeted, that perhaps she had been singled out by a hitman or some other kind of contract killer who had the sole intention of killing her that night. In particular, some have speculated that because of her prior arrest for soliciting prostitution and her lenient treatment by law enforcement, that she might have been cooperating with ongoing investigations in some way, perhaps giving up information about some other local sex workers in order for her own charges to be dropped. Some have even speculated that she wanted to get out of her current sex work partnership and may have been working with police or legal representatives to get herself out of the life that she had been living. However, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of evidence to support this. Some of this speculation points to multiple people being arrested for sex work in the weeks and or months before Shelbey's murder as possible proof, and think that this may have earned her the ire of someone who then singled her out for death. However, that's not really evidence in a tangible way. It's kind of just a coincidence, and as far as I know, there's no evidence linking Shelbey to the arrest in the Houston area in any way. Just a hunch on behalf of certain people. As for Shelbey trying to get out of sex work, I personally wouldn't doubt that. It was just a job to her after all, a means to an end. and Shelby's stated goal was always to pursue modeling. She wanted out of the sex work at some point, I'm sure, but was still making good money at the time, and was still trying to save up. If she was trying to actively get out of that life, then I wouldn't be surprised, but at the same point, there's no evidence that this may have played a part in her death. Personally, I also don't think that Shelby was singled out for a hit, or whatever the other theories may be. Namely because there are so many better ways to orchestrate the killing of someone that don't involve gaining access to their apartment in such a way, killing her in the midst of having sex, and leaving behind this amount of evidence. That's a level of exposure that I would imagine hitmen just don't want to have to deal with. Also, this theory just kind of assumes that people involved with sex work are clearly connected to other shady industries, like hitmen. The pimps in sex work are usually just opportunists that don't want to get a real job. For example, Marcus, Shelby's pimp that many thought was her boyfriend, had previous convictions for drug dealing. He wasn't a criminal mastermind with all these connections to hitmen and stuff. He was just a regular lowlife looking for an easy way to make a buck. I would also like to include another piece of evidence that I think indicates Shelby was not the target of a hit or anything like that. Prior to the suspected killer arriving at Shelby's apartment building, he had texted other sex workers who had posted advertisements on Backpage. Almost all of the women were similar in appearance, young, attractive women with blonde hair and similar builds. To me, this indicates that Shelby wasn't being hunted, per se, but rather that the killer had a type. He was looking for someone that looked like her, possibly because she reminded him of someone else, and he wanted to take his anger out on her. This information, however, does lead us to a potentially darker theory. In the years since Shelby's murder, it has been theorized by law enforcement that the suspected culprit was likely a serial killer, possibly someone with experience who had committed similar crimes in the past, and would continue to do so. Maybe not with incredible frequency, but this was likely someone that had aspirations of doing this again and again. Early on, investigators with the Houston Police Department would consult with the FBI, and the FBI's profilers seemed to confirm their own suspicions. Per Detective Dustin Crowder, their analysis unit said that there's a likelihood this guy was a serial killer based on the factors of who the victim was and how meticulous in concealing his identity. The crime itself seemed to show signs of someone with killing experience. Beforehand, the killer had purchased a burner phone to use in the correspondence, which indicates that he had bought the phone in an untraceable way. He likely knew that phones not registered to anyone's name could still be traced because of certain markers, like the phone number and cell tower data. But if the offender had purchased the phone using cash and then waited a non-significant period, the likelihood of security or surveillance footage being maintained that long was unlikely. Those of you that have listened for a while might remember me talking about this very thing back in the Oki Al-Kite episode, when the killer had employed a similar tactic. Detective Dustin Crowder would tell Crime Watch Daily, "The phone was purchased shortly before this incident, and then deactivated immediately afterwards, so the phone that the suspect used was in fact just for this purpose, and then deactivated and no longer traceable." As investigators would learn, the phone had been purchased at a nearby Walmart and then activated roughly 12 days before Shelby's murder. The surveillance footage at the Walmart had been wiped before it could be tracked down. In the days before the crime, the offender only used the phone when he was on or near major roads, such as freeways and interstates, and it never pinged from the same location consistently. It was only ever active in the Sugar Land or Southwest Houston area, pinging in the area near Shelby's apartment a few days before the murder, although it's still unclear to me whether they had planned out the date ahead of time or he just so happened to be in the same area. After starting their communication via text, the suspected killer had gone to Shelby's apartment. There, he began engaging her in sex before putting a knife to her throat whilst in the act. From there, he seems to have cleaned up and left the apartment within 15 or so minutes, acting nonchalantly as he made his way through the apartment lobby. Shortly thereafter, the phone was deactivated. If I had to guess, it was probably destroyed and discarded. And it's probably sitting in a landfill right now. Whoever this man had been, he had known to wait long enough for Shelby to make contact with her boyfriend, Marcus, before killing her. This indicated that he was likely familiar with sex work and probably scoped out the crime scene, Shelby's apartment, to make sure that they were alone, that there wasn't a boyfriend in the closet, anything like that. He then committed the crime and disappeared in a very short amount of time, arriving at the apartment building at around 8:35 and then walking back out through the same lobby at 8:57. Shelbey had sent Marcus her text letting him know that she was good at 8:40. Within 17 minutes, the killer had committed the crime and fled. The unknown subject left behind no known fingerprints at the crime scene, and if I had to guess, he probably wore protection for the sexual acts he engaged with before killing Shelbey. However, police have never stated that. That's just a guess on my part due to his level of preparation. He also likely brought his own murder weapon, which he somehow stashed in his shorts. I wouldn't be surprised if he wore a condom and those were also in his pockets. It was very likely that this man was not from the Houston area. He probably traveled in and committed the crime, knowing that he wouldn't be recognized by any locals. And due to Shelbey's profession, the story has not received the media attention it deserves, something that likely drew the killer to her. She was a sex worker, the less dead, as they're sometimes referred to, people whose death goes unnoticed or ignored by most of the world. It's possible that Shelbey's profession was an insult to the killer, that he viewed her as lesser than him, and therefore not worth living any longer. If I had to guess, this killer is someone who had deep-seated hatred towards sex workers or women in general. Maybe because of his relationship with his mother. Maybe because of inadequacies within himself that women had highlighted in the past. Regardless, he had decided to enact these impulses on someone he'd only known for a few minutes, meaning that the crime itself was undoubtedly premeditated. As stated by Shelbey's sister, Christina Scott, to Crime Watch Daily, he had to have had some knowledge on how deep to cut the throat, where to cut the throat, what to wear, how to do it. He walked out with not even a spot of blood on him. He walked out with the same clothes he walked in with. In Shelbey's obituary, her loved ones wrote, "Beyond her dreams and aspirations, Shelbey was the embodiment of warmth and love, donning the mantle of a cool and affectionate aunt. Her unwavering presence was a comforting beacon, a pillar of support for anyone fortunate enough to be a part of her inner circle. She embodied the essence of the family members and friends everyone yearns for, a shining star whose light will forever grace our hearts and memories. Shelbey's vibrant life may have been tragically taken from us, but her indomitable love and spirit will forever endure, a testament to her enduring legacy. As we remember her, we must also hold hope that justice will ultimately prevail." Sadly, the status of Shelbey Thornburgh-Crocker's case has remained unchanged since 2015. Her murder is still unsolved, despite police having video proof of the killer in question, and possibly even having forensic evidence of him in their custody. It's widely believed that investigators may have found hair fibers belonging to the killer at the crime scene, but they reportedly didn't match up with anyone currently in CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, the big computerized database of DNA made available to law enforcement. This indicates that the killer has not been arrested for other crimes as of yet, but his actions when carrying out this crime indicate that this was probably not his first. Undoubtedly not his last either. How many other crimes has this unknown killer gotten away with over the years? Anyone with information about this case is encouraged to reach out to investigators. You can reach Houston Police's Homicide Division at 713-308-3600. You can also submit your information anonymously to Houston Crime Stoppers at 713-222-TIPS. There is a $5,000 reward for anyone that helps lead police to the identity of this killer. If you or someone you know lived in the area, or may have been in or around the Conquistador apartment complex on the evening of November 4th, 2015, please reach out to someone. Police have enhanced the footage over the years, and have noticed people sitting in the apartment lobby that fateful night. Check out the footage for yourself, see if you know any of these people, or try to remember if maybe one of them is you. Try to remember if you were there. Your information may be useful, whether you believe it or not, even if it's questionable. reach out. Maybe you can claim the reward money. Maybe you can even help solve a murder. Until such a time, the story of Shelbey Thornburgh-Crocker will remain unresolved. Thank you for listening. This episode of Unresolved was researched, written, hosted, and produced by myself, Micheal Whelan. The music throughout the show was also composed by me, except where noted in the show notes. The producers of this episode, who support the show each month on Patreon, are Roberta Jansen, Sarah Moscaratolo, Brandy Nordine, Jacinda Klass, Alex Kellergopoulos, Scott Meesey, Ben Crocum, Patrick Loxo, Marion Welsh, Lauren Nicole, Sally Ranford, Rita Spa, James Weiss, Stephen Diaz, Derek Smith, and Heather Fiddler. Thank you all for your monthly support. It really does mean the world to me. I would also like to thank the rest of the patrons who support the show each month on Patreon. You can become a producer or a patron by heading to patreon.com/unresolvedpod, where you can get access to our entire archive of bonus episodes, as well as episodes of the Patreon exclusive show, Resolved. There I take on solved cases, which normally aren't as frustrating as the unsolved ones. Normally, at least. I've got some new episodes coming out on that feed really soon, and a couple of them are doozies. For everyone else, thanks for listening. We should be back with another new episode next week, so until then, stay tuned, stay healthy, stay active, and most importantly, stay safe. I'll talk to you all later.